Welcome to the History of Iowa Trails. I'm Andrea Boulton, Statewide Trails and Greenways Director for Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of EarthFest 2021 and for all of you for joining this presentation. I hope you're able to walk away having learned something new or been inspired to get out on one of Iowa's beautiful trails. Some of you may be familiar with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, and some of you may be learning about us for the first time. But all of you are here because of the mutual interest you share. I would like to take a very few minutes to tell you a little bit more about Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and one of our best kept secrets, our trails work. Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation is a private nonprofit conservation organization working to ensure Iowans will always have beautiful natural areas to bike, hike, paddle, to recharge, relax, and refresh, and to keep Iowa healthy and vibrant. We were founded in 1979 under Governor Ray as a response to the need for an organization that could be nimble when it came to purchasing land and protecting it for conservation purposes. Some of our founders included Jerry Schneff, who was actually our first president. Jerry went on to lead Keep Iowa Beautiful and Iowa's Hometown Pride program. Bob Buckmaster of KWWL TV in Eastern Iowa, and Dick Young of Young Plumbing and Heating in Waterloo. We're an accredited land trust through the national organization Land Trust Alliance, and our 27 staff across the state accomplish our work through the support of donors and guidance of a 32-member board of directors. We are a statewide organization with our headquarters in Des Moines and satellite offices in Western Iowa or the Lust Hills region, Eastern Iowa, and Northeast Iowa or the Blufflands region. Since 1979, we've helped to protect over 180,000 acres of Iowa's prairies, woodlands, lakes, and rivers, and we've blazed the way for nearly 700 miles of Iowa's trails. There's so much more I could share about Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and the work that we do. I encourage you to check out our website or to reach out to us if you have any other questions about us or our projects. But I think it's time that we head out to Iowa's trails. That's why we're all here, right? Enjoying being outside on a trail is something that we all share. It's where we meet some of our best friends and spend time with our families. In 1981, INHF saw the opportunity and value in protecting railroad corridors that were going to be abandoned for future wildlife habitat and community use. We were a natural fit to take on these projects because of our experience purchasing property as a land trust, and because we were not a government entity pressured by the fears of the unknown. So just like Jan in our quote here, we knew that nothing could replace the connectedness people feel outside. Not even Facebook. And I think this past year has emphasized, underlined, and italicized this point as we saw trail use increase by 20 to 200% across the state. So what does it mean when I say Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation has blazed the way for 700 miles of trails? So INHF assists communities, counties, and the state by guiding partnerships, acting as their map and compass through complex projects. So this means walking them through the rail banking process with the Federal Surface Transportation Board, negotiating and purchasing corridors, providing interim financing for land acquisition, serving as a coach and sharing technical assistance for grants, fundraising, communications, and volunteer coordination, assisting with gift processing, online giving, and gift acknowledgements for local projects, and acting as a trail endowment fund manager, or serving as a statewide clearinghouse for trail information and best practices, and so much more. But what are trails? Let's get down to the basics. Trails are evidence of people's travel. They lead us places, ensuring with each step that there is something to see or somewhere to be if we keep following the path. Whether you realize it or not, nearly all of our multi-use trails here in Iowa have existed in some form or another for hundreds of years, because we're always moving, always seeing, always on to the next thing. So I'm going to show you some maps, and I want you to think about whether or not you see some similarities between them. They're the historic railroad map historic roadway map, and the Iowa Trails 2000 vision map. We've been identifying trail corridors for eons and giving them facelifts every century or so. And the maps you just saw are somewhat in historic progression. Rail gave way to cars and then came bikes. And given the way that cyclists are treated these days, you'd think that was the progression, right? But let's back up. Feet, our feet, horses' feet, mule feet. Our feet came first. Think about the cow path that we often point to as evidence that people are trying to go somewhere. Followed by rivers. Think about the Great River Road, the Lewis and Clark route as they've made their way to the west. And then we figured out trains. And finally, the velocipede and the high wheeler. Now, to be clear, the train was invented in 1804. The first public railway appeared in 1825. But all that happened over in Europe. Locomotive fever didn't hit the US until the late 1800s. Most of the railroads in Iowa were built around the 1880s. The velocipedes made their debut in 1818, and the high wheeler came in 1870. But really, by 1860, here in America, bicycling was in full swing. So feet, river, trains, cycles. What about the car? Henry Ford introduced the Model T in 1908. Mass production starts 5 years later in 1913. So why does this matter? You came to hear about the history of Iowa's trails. Well, it matters because I want to make it clear. Bicycles have a deep history in our movement, the transportation of goods and people. Pedestrians have an even richer history in the development of the United States. But now, well, you only walk because you don't have a car, and you only bike for the fun of it, for recreation. The next time someone tells you that, you tell them that they owe some thanks to the bicycle for their enjoyment of the paved path they call a road. Maybe some of you have heard about the Good Roads movement. The Good Roads movement began in the late 1870s. When was the mass production of the Model T again? That's right, about 40 years later. The coming of the railways killed off the stagecoach trade. Almost all rural roads reverted to local, low-level use. The Good Roads movement gained momentum when bicycle enthusiasts, riding clubs, and manufacturers met to form the League of American Wheelmen. Their goal? To improve the nation's roadways. Outside cities, roads were dirt or gravel, mud in the winter, dust in the summer. They pushed for high-quality sealed surfaces and were the first to lobby for national funding and leadership for roads. In 1885, the Iowa chapter of the League of American Wheelmen was founded to champion the continued improvement of roads for cycling here in Iowa. In the mid-1890s, the first coal cinder bicycle road was completed. It was 16 miles long and ran from Des Moines to Altoona. It appears that Iowa has always been making bold claims. By 1895, the Iowa League of Wheelmen claimed that Iowa had more people riding bicycles than any state west of the Mississippi. Judge E.H. Thayer, who presided over the 1891 Rhodes Convention, wrote in the Good Roads documents that it was the farmer's duty to make conditions such that boys and girls could easily, cheaply, and speedily run from the town to the country and from the country to the town. They would, in this way, be able to enjoy all the comforts, pleasures, and advantages of both city and country life, and thus stay on the farm. The following year, the Good Roads Convention came to Iowa, and it was the largest assembly outside of a political gathering ever held in the state. Let that sink in for a moment. In 1904, Iowa spent about $3.1 million to improve their roads. That would be nearly $80 million in 1 year in today's dollars. These benefits that the League of American Wheelmen fought for were soon recognized by motorists. Roads that were improved for cyclists decades later were renamed highways. The Iowa Bicycle Route 24 here in the League of American Wheelmen's Iowa's road book runs from Des Moines to Boone. So it ran through Des Moines, Saylorville, Polk City, Madrid, Grayson, and Boone. And the Iowa Bicycle Route 25 listed here ran from Des Moines to Ames. So Des Moines through Huxley to Ames. So now we're in the 1900s. The wheelmen have literally paved the way for the automobile to revolutionize America's transportation system. But give it time. The heavy lifting that the wheelmen were doing was now being taken on by other interests. So let's leave them there for a while and revisit that other transportation mode, the railroad. Between 1911 and 1917, the miles of track peaked. The miles of rail track peaked in Iowa at 10,500. Towns sprang up along railroad hubs. Soon, railroads connected rural communities across the state. Over 1,000 railroad depots were built in Iowa. But by 1980, half of that network had been discontinued. Today, Iowa has roughly 3,500 miles of active track. The National Trail System Act is amended in 1983. The dramatic decline that we saw in the 80s of the nation's railroad infrastructure became a growing concern to Congress. It became apparent to them that something was needed to be done to preserve the nation's rail system for future transportation uses. So in 1983, they amended the National Trail System Act to create a program that would preserve rail corridors or rail bank them, through which corridors would otherwise be abandoned can be preserved for future rail use by converting them into interim trails. The old inactive railroad corridor gets a facelift for trail use. Of course, something like this doesn't happen first. Work to convert discontinued rail corridors started in the 1960s and 70s and helped to push such federal policy to be enacted. The first rail-to-trail project in the US was the Elroy Sparta Trail in Wisconsin in 1965. Less than 10 years later, Iowa saw its first rail trail, the Cinder Path in Lucas County, a 13.5-mile trail from Sheridan to Humiston. That was 1974, and away it started. In 1979, the Chicago Great Western Rail Line between Dubuque and Dyersville ended service and created a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to develop a premier trail. A trail along this corridor would not only be beautiful running along the blufflands, but also protect a great deal of natural habitat. And it provides an opportunity to connect communities that the new highways have bypassed. Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation was founded in 1979, and these trail projects were some of our first organization's projects. And I can share secondhand knowledge about how things went. So you've got a beautiful trail corridor. Great, right? No. Burn the bridges. That was the mantra at one public meeting where emotions ran high discussing the rail-to-trail conversion. Coincidentally, on half a dozen of the lines, more than 30 bridges were burned. Hog manure was dumped on the trail, barricades were erected, death threats were made against the leading trail advocates. Despite land records showing that the railroad had good title to the land and could sell it to the county for a trail, lawsuits by adjoining landowners were filed, and portions of the trail were blocked. Imagine what a connection from Dubuque to Backbone State Park in Delaware County could be. But nevertheless, my great predecessors never gave up. They never backed down, and in 1982, several segments of the trail opened, with the entire 26-mile corridor completed in 1986, and now one of Iowa's most popular trails. It was also one of Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation's first trail projects, along with the Cedar Valley Nature Trail. The Cedar Valley Nature Trail follows the route from Waterloo to Cedar Falls in northern Iowa's Cedar Valley Railroad. About the time that segments of the Heritage Valley Nature Trail were being opened, the rail corridor for the Cedar Valley was being purchased. A 52-mile corridor from Hiawatha to Waterloo. And surely the folks over in this part of the state would understand the benefits a trail could bring. Surely they saw the demand and the success of the Heritage Trail. No. The Neil Smith Trail in 1982, one of the oldest trails in the Central Iowa Trails Network. I could be wrong, and I probably am, but I'm going to say that this project might have been a little easier as far as the bridge burning goes. It's named after one of Iowa's longest serving congressmen. So now we're in 1987, and the Chicago and Northwestern Transportation Company decides that they want to abandon their route from Waukee to Redfield to Panora to Jefferson. And before they can, the Central Iowa Energy Cooperative steps in and purchases the corridor. Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation actually assisted the CIEC and the county conservation boards to partner together to develop a multi-use trail on the right-of-way, so long as the need for a new railroad didn't arise. The first section of the Raccoon River Valley Trail opened in 1989 with a 34-mile route completed in 1990 from Waukee to Yale. A 12-mile addition from Jefferson to Herndon was completed in 1997. And in 1999, a 5-mile extension connected the Raccoon River Valley Trail in Waukee to the Greenbelt Trail in Clive. In 2001, INHF assisted the counties in purchasing the corridor from CIEC for permanent ownership of the 56-mile route. A little over 10 years later, the 33-mile North Loop was completed, creating an 89-mile rail trail. Then came the Chautauqua Valley Nature Trail and the Great Western. And in 1989, the Wabash Trace Nature Trail made the scene. 63 miles, one of Iowa's longest and most popular rail trails, nearly the entire trail being built by hand. The Wabash Railroad's Iowa spur connecting Omaha and Council Bluffs through northern Missouri was rail-banked in 1988. Residents and activists came together to form a new nonprofit, Southwest Iowa Nature Trails, Inc. Together with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, they secured ownership and funding to start building the trail. This was one of our first examples of a local team of volunteers and trail enthusiasts making something happen on their own. Bridges were bid out to volunteers and families. Adopt a bridge and build it yourself. Bridge blitzes were organized. People spent the weekend camping, drinking, and building a bridge. And so 10 years and over 70 bridges later, the Wabash Trace Nature Trail was opened. Today, trail volunteers still work to maintain the trail, clearing branches, mowing, patching the trail, and fundraising to pave sections. Taco Tuesday started as Taco Thursday on the Wabash Trace. Thousands of people would ride from Council Bluffs to Mineola. It was even featured on a Jenny O ground turkey commercial a few years back. Now, I wish I had slides that I could flip through that showed you the progression of trails being built in Iowa by segments. I can't do that, but what I can show you are slides that show trail work being done by counties over 5-year segments. So first we have trail work going on in 1981, by 1989, by 1999, by 2009, by 2015, and by 2020, nearly every county in the state has had some sort of trail work vision planned or being implemented. And so here we are today. We've come so far from burn the bridges, right? This is a map of the new Iowa Trail Vision put out by the State Department of Transportation. And we start looking at things like this and we brag on ourselves that we're the trails capital of the world. with over thousands of miles of multi-use trails, with a significant complex of trails here in the Iowa City metro alone. We have water trails, we have hiking trails in state parks, we have snowmobile trails. And really, when you put it all out there, we have over 900 miles of water trails, 8,000 miles of snowmobile trails, over 600 miles of hiking trails in state parks, and 300 miles of single track trails. We have 2,000 miles of grade separated multi-use trail, and over 3,000 miles when you put it together of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. We have 5 state significant trail networks and 4 national significant trails. We have 24 national recreation trails designated by the Department of the Interior. And in 2014, we were ranked 5th in the country for the number of rail trail conversions. You can only convert what you have, right? So looking at how far we've come, you'd think that our Burn the Bridges Day was far behind us. I mean, we've got trails like the internationally award-winning High Trestle Trail. But no, this is a photo from a few years ago of a bridge along the Iowa River's Edge Trail in Hardin County, a trail that's currently being developed by community leaders, counties and cities in Hardin and Marshall counties. Bridges are still being burnt, funding is still being cut, but if there's anything that our cycling history has shown, it's that we don't back down and we don't give up. We'll come back around. So where are we going from here? As I pointed out in a few slides ago, this is Iowa's new statewide trail vision. The existing trails are in black and our planned trails are in green. This complete vision includes over 5,000 miles of multi-use trails. I mentioned we have 4 nationally significant trails. The American Discovery Trail, which is a hiking with some biking accommodations that connect the Atlantic to the Pacific. The Mississippi River Trail is a bicycle route that connects the headwaters in Minnesota to the Gulf. The Lewis and Clark Trail, also a bicycle route that meanders along the Missouri River, following the Great Explorers route. And then the Great American Rail Trail that I'll speak more about in a minute. We also have 3 US bicycle routes that are part of the larger US bicycle route system championed by Adventure Cycling. And you can see those here as the purple, the blue, and the orange. And you can see the full network of the US bicycle routes and how Iowa ties into the greater system here. The Great American Rail Trail was launched in 2019 by the Rails to Trails Conservancy with a mission to create grade-separated multi-use trail from Washington, D.C. to Washington State. It's 3,700 miles, and of that, 53% of it is already completed. We have about 465 miles of that route here in Iowa, from Davenport to Council Bluffs. And you can see from this map that much of that work is already completed and much of it is in the works. So why does this matter? This matters because these matter. Not the headlines themselves, but what they represent. Our trail system means livability, walkability. I'm just going to call that the ease of living. The ability to feel connected to people and places, environmental health, which leads to human health, a community gathering space for events, creating an increased quality of life, community engagement, bringing it back to around to community pride, and let's not forget economic development. And that's why it's important, and that's why, with your help, we'll keep building an Iowa's trail history. So what next? It's your adventure on the Iowa Trail. I appreciate you guys spending some time with me today and learning a little bit more about Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and the history of Iowa's trails in the bicycle movement. I'll leave you with what I believe is Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation's first and only music video. Thank you for joining me today, and please reach out if you have any questions, and join us as we continue to make Iowa the world capital of trails.
look at that bird? Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think that my bird is complete? Wouldn't you look at the trails? The trails have everything. I could get on my bike, hike, run, or row 1,800 miles. Trails unfold. Sometimes in Iowa we think, well, is there anything? Get outdoors, look around and discover. Bring your family, your dog, or friends too. You want economic prosperity? Trails bring plenty. They're statewide, they're close by, and there's more. Sometimes the trails where the people are. Sometimes you're alone to reflect in nature. You're strolling around, they are healthy and they're free. Yes, you can walk. Yes, you can run. Even spend all the day in the sun. Wandering free. Wish I